You may recall that a couple of months ago I did a video on the gorgeous yet largely unsuccessful Lotus Evora GTE car. I won't go into too great detail as to why it didn't do well, considering I have a 23-minute video covering it on my channel. However, just to give you a basic sit-rep of this car's life, it competed in the Intercontinental Le Mans Cup in 2011 with a two-car entry under the Jet Alliance racing team, performing admirably at Le Mans, but not anywhere else. Lotus and Jet Alliance ended its partnership at the end of the year, and the car would then race in the American Le Mans Series for 2012 via Alex Yob Racing, where it had a pretty dreadful season. That team then raced a Ferrari for the next season of ALMS, leaving the Lotus GTE project at a standstill. It was at that point that I concluded the video, because the Lotus wasn't used in any capacity in any GT category the following year, so I thought that was a good moment in the Evora story to end the video. However, as it turns out, the story of the Evora GTE didn't stop there. In fact, the story is still going. Sort of. You see, this isn't completely a Lotus Evora GTE. It's been updated in such a way that it can't be called that. It's been updated by a team called the National Motorsport Academy. This is a very unique team in that every element that goes into running the race team is done by students. Tuning, setup changes, testing, data analysis, you name it. The team compete in a UK-based series called the GT Cup. It's a bit like the British GT Championship, except it doesn't quite have the same level of notoriety. However, there is a wider set of GT-based machinery that compete in said series, from your usual modern-day GT3-based machinery to some older silhouette-style vehicles.
And as you can tell by the fact that I'm now speaking to you in real life form, I'm at the latest round of the GT Cup series here at Silverstone. Although that's because the National Motorsport Academy invited me here to take a closer look at the Lotus after they saw my original video on the car.
So the National Motorsport Academy has had the Lotus since around Christmas time of 2015 when they bought it. The car then ran in the 2016 GT Cup in the GTC class, and in that championship came second overall. Then in 2017 in the GTO class this time, they came in third, both seasons with Gareth Downing at the wheel. In 2018 however, the team took the championship in the GTO class. Except that was in the team's other car, the utterly ferocious Mosler MT900. Why? Well, that's because the Lotus was being upgraded somewhat. Visually, if you glance at it, it doesn't look as though it's been radically changed. It's only when you take a close-up inspection of the car where you really notice its alterations from the one that competed at the end of the 2017 GT Cup season. For a start off, the aerodynamic arrangements on the Evora have been heavily changed. Actually, I'll hand over to someone better than me who can explain the changes and its subsequent impacts.
We've got the two cars here. We've got the original Le Mans spec, Evora GTE, and obviously we've got what we've created over the past probably 4 or 5 years now, which is our NMA version of an Evora. Once we got the car, and obviously we raced to different regulations, we've began a journey, and it is a development journey, to optimise aerodynamics within our regulations, which gives us a lot more scope for what we can actually do versus what Lotus were able to do for the initial design. The side skirts on the original car are non-existent. We're still running the same A-pillar. One point on that which we haven't actually developed yet, although we have a few versions, is obviously we're looking to bring these in to allow the air to escape more effectively, because this is our limitation. The chassis comes to here, so we can't go any further in without drastic modification to the original chassis. Now, moving to the front end, this is the original Le Mans front end. There were a couple of variations to it. You can see one here with the cover on, and then the other side is removed, and there was the availability for dive planes to be put into this indentation area here. Aside that, in terms of flow, we had the brake ducts and the main rad aperture here, and that was about it on that car. So moving over to our car, as I say, we are not as restricted in terms of what we've got available to us freedom wise. So the first thing we did was we extended the floor as far as we could, Probably a good time to point out one of the key points of our design, which is that we have a customer who specified what they wanted the car to look like. We have the heritage of the car itself, so we don't want it to look like it's had pieces bolted on and it's flown through some sort of aftermarket modification shop. So what we've tried to do is be as respectful as we can to the original car and the period at which it raced, but at the same time try and extend the capabilities of the car by making it more in tune with our engine and the aerodynamics that we have available to us. So we had a first iteration which was just a flat floor to move out, and then popular at the time was this sort of raked side skirt that went with the lines of the car. So this is what we've adopted at this point. It's not optimized at this point. What we've done is we've gone to the extent of what we can do, and this will be the next part, because obviously what we do for our day jobs, if you will, is we teach education engineering. So these are projects that between myself and the students will look to develop this car, and this is an ongoing project. So we're not looking to finish it at a particular point. We're just going to keep this development going for the duration of whilst this car is in our hands. We've retained the original rear wing because actually the aero was more biased that way anyway. The side skirt, again, is at this point an extension to the Max and something that aesthetically suits the rest of the car. And then if we go to the front bumper, this is where we see the majority of the big changes. So our car is mainly changed because now it's a supercharged unit. At the time of starting the design, you've seen a photo of what was the road GTE of the period, the race GTE, which obviously we have over there, and then the CAD mock-up of this car, which is where this one was designed. We designed that in-house. Part of the way through that design process, the location of the charge coolers changed. So what originally for me was going to be a really big front splitter turned into a multifaceted design, and I actually lost two of my aero channels, which were the outermost large channels that you can see. So we have a ramp system here now. We've got brake cooling, which compared to the original car would have been just the circular aperture, so we're channeling that now right the way from the centre, and it goes through underneath the ramp area, which I'll explain in a moment. And what we've also done is we've retained the original aperture for the rad. Now the reason we did that, obviously this car did have development carried out on it, and throughout all the time that we ran the car in its original format, we were adding tape to keep this car at the right temperature. It was overcooling. So at the time we deemed that the standard to the race car rad aperture was efficient, potentially over efficient for that engine, and so we've decided to retain that for our upgraded model. They're identical in the centre, so they've got the centre feed and then they've got the two outer feeds for the rad, and that's it on top. But what we wanted to try and do was incorporate a flow path which wouldn't mess with anything that's pre-existing on the car, because again, there's design work already been carried out. We have a design brief from our boss, which is how he wants the car to look, and then obviously somewhere in between those two things we end up with a car that does what it wants to do, does what it's supposed to do, and hopefully does it efficiently and effectively. So going from the front end and looking to exit somewhere, we've already got some work done on the A-pillars, but because we're trying to work from the front back, we opted for an outer exit, which hopefully you'll see ties in quite nicely with the original aesthetic of the car. So now rather than 3 on the top, we've got 5. The 2 outer ones feed beyond. You might be able to just see on the arch on that side there. Feed out, and our bonnet sits on top here, and obviously we have flow exit through our charge cooler rads, up and out through the bonnet. The aim being that because there's already flow coming out from the rads in the centre, that'll all blend together, merge nicely and flow with the original lines and flow characteristics of the car. Our brake designs had to be modified slightly again because of the charge cooler relocation, the rads for the charge coolers. So this is our brake ducting now, which obviously comes to a halt at the front of the arches, and then that channels up into the original ducting and cooling for the front brakes. And that kind of takes us to where we're at with the development package. We can look a little bit deeper into the actual front end in particular. On the original one we have that really small splitter, and what we wanted to try and do again, because the design had already been optimised and was deemed efficient within the regulations, we looked to try and retain as much of that as possible whilst also again extending to what our regulations allow. So what you'll see is we have a slightly different front bumper which terminates at the black painted part here, and then we have our splitter which we're now allowed 100mm of front splitter, and that travels obviously the width of the car. The bonnet itself, because we have that merge between the GTE road car and the GTE race car, means that we actually have a slightly different profile from here on the bumper down. So that wide mouth open design affords us a little bit of extra length in terms of the actual bumper design itself. Designed in-house, put out to the students to work on and tinker with and develop, and that's essentially what's going to happen for the rest of the car now, is we'll continue to develop down the car, starting at the front, work our way through. We'll look at wheel arches next, brake cooling again if we need to again, side skirts, A-pillars, we'll start to look at the rear end, the wing, the diffuser, and it's all an iterative process. So as we work down the car, each bit we redesign is obviously going to make some changes to the rest of the car, and we'll look to manage and optimise that. Obviously in the grand scheme of things now, it's a fairly technically old design, I suppose you could call it, but actually it gets a lot of attention at the race weekends because it's not the same as everything else. And for an educational academy to have something like this that stands out, it's really good. And it's, as you've seen this weekend, 2 days of just getting involved and having a really good time, learning the car. People who've never even worked on a race car, this facilitates that need for them to be able to get in, get hands on, work with us as the engineers, and have a really good insight into motorsport behind the scenes.
However, the changes didn't just come cosmetically and aerodynamically. Mechanically, the Evora is different too. Only slightly though. As you may have heard earlier, all they've done is change the engine. Like I say, just a small change.
Changing the entire engine, it's not a small change, let's put it that way. What were the reasons behind this decision?
Purely power and torque. So the normally aspirated 4-litre Cosworth engines that were used at Le Mans, they're quoted around 475 horsepower, I think they were at the time. We've got 7 of them upstairs here actually, so we could run quite a few of them if we wanted. Over time we realised when we're going to dynos and things, they didn't quite have that power, to be fair, or not installed in the car especially, you know, at the wheels. So we decided we needed an upgrade if we wanted to race against new GT3, modern GT3 cars. So we decided to go to supercharged V6.
I think it's fair to say that the National Motorsport Academy and the students that have come into the team have done an amazing job on the car. Aesthetically, it looks more of a GTE car than the original did, with its much more pronounced aerodynamic devices. Yet despite this, I think it still looks just as beautiful as the original car did. So what has this new upgraded Evora done on the track? Well, last year the car ran in a series called the Slicks Series. Ran by the Classic Sports Car Club, it's a championship where older GT/sports car based vehicles are raced around some of Britain's finest circuits, including Spa-Francorchamps, although last time I heard Spa wasn't in Britain. It's more of an entry-level series for GT cars, so that drivers can get experience for when they get to the likes of the GT Cup and British GT Championship. Plus, because of how it allows older machinery to be used, you can get fairly varied grids. Perhaps noticeably outside of the Lotus, you have this Volvo S60 silhouette car that ran in the Dutch Supercar Challenge. One of the beauties of this series is that also it still gives a competitive championship for the old machinery to be used, so that they don't get covered in cobwebs. One of the purposes for the National Motorsport Academy to race the Lotus in that series that year was to primarily get the car up to speed and see what the new updates had done to the car. Unfortunately, whilst competing in the series, the car suffered a big crash which required a major rebuild, as it was pretty much completely written off. Now, whilst this didn't help get the team a huge amount of data to see what the impacts of their changes had done to the Evora, one advantage that they did have with the Lotus, and in turn was one of the reasons that the Academy bought the car in the first place, was that it came with a huge amount of spare parts included in the purchase of the car. So many spare parts in fact, that it would be enough to build a second Evora.
However, this is where the story kind of leads up to, really. The team were hoping to run the Mosler in the GT Cup Series season this year, but after a few issues with that car, the Lotus has now been thrusted back into the spotlight once again. The car has been tested several times this year, but this is the first race outing it's had this year. So, in essence, I'm kind of seeing the beginning of a new and hopefully successful chapter in the car's life.
Now, I thought that considering the position I was in, I thought I would ask if the team had gotten a greater understanding of why the original Lotus struggled against its competitors in the ILMC and ALMS.
So, to be fair to Lotus, obviously this was a 6-month project really. They had to build this car and get to Le Mans. And obviously back then in 2011 the aero regs and things were very restrictive. A lot of the GT regs were more restrictive than they are today. So it was quite obvious what needed changing to take it up to modern GT3 and GTE standards. So as you start working through those, and to be fair, Lotus, when we first bought the car, talked to us a lot about what their future plans with that car were going to be to make it competitive over like a 1 and 2 year run. Unfortunately, the plug was pulled on the project and they didn't continue. So we implemented some of their things, which helped it massively with the aero distribution to the front of the car, which helped it handle a lot better. So and we had the freedom to do that with our regs. So as we started following what Lotus were suggesting to do or they were going to do, that then allowed us to open up a real big area of change because of what our race regs now allow us to do.
So, how did the team get on during the weekend's 4 races? Well, it's important to remember that the team were using the weekend for the purposes of mileage gathering. The team even started the car from the pit lane on a few occasions. Entered in the GTO class, the team would grab second in the first race, running without any major hitches. In the first endurance race, the entry in the GTO division went from 4 to 3 cars, as this unmissable Porsche would be missing the rest of the weekend sadly. So a podium was guaranteed, with the Lotus taking the bronze trophy this time round, although the car suffered from overheating issues midway through the race. The Sunday sprint event allowed the team to see what the Lotus was like in changeable conditions. Second place is what they earned. The final race took part in some utterly atrocious weather, and unfortunately the Lotus's cause wasn't helped by how the car was stuck in gear, as you can perhaps tell by this audio. At the checkered flag, a third place is what the Lotus would collect, driven this weekend by Jay Shepherd, someone with experience in British GT and TVR Tuscans. A trophy in every race. Sure, it was all but guaranteed, but that wasn't the point of this weekend. As for the future of the car,
so the first thing really was to get through a race weekend. We had thrown the car together, been built properly, but we had a 2-week window and we knew there may be things that are going to break and not be quite right in that 2-week window. Trying to build a car like this in 2 weeks is no mean feat. So we were happy just to finish some races. As it happened, we got 2 seconds and 2 thirds across the weekend out of the 4 races. So now we've got a small list that we just want to work through and tidy some bits up, ready for Donington, and I think there shouldn't be a reason this car now can't get a pole and a race win this season.
Getting the opportunity to see the car in action, up close in person, was an absolute privilege and a phenomenal experience. That being said though, I want to end this video by saying something pertinent about these quote-unquote failed racing programs.
This experience has been amazing and I've thoroughly enjoyed every second of it. It's been actually one of the best experiences I've ever had, really, and I have an enormous amount of gratitude for the guys for letting me have as closer access to the car as I've been fortunate enough to have. However, coming to Silverstone to see the Evora in person has reaffirmed the reason why I've done these projects on the Jaguar XK GT2 and the Suzuki WRC car, and it's made me want to look at more projects like this in the future to see how they ended up.
Because to me, whilst these programs weren't successful at all compared to their respective competitors, there's still a cool story behind them. I'd argue that these efforts have just as much of a story to tell than the ones that did perform well. However, I think it's also important to acknowledge that these cars even exist in the first place. It costs millions of currency to create a brand new racing machine from the ground up. A manufacturer that makes one is in essence taking a risk every time one is made. Because if it doesn't do well, they'll perceive that its image to the public is damaged in some form. Was the original Lotus program any good? Not really, but its journey has caught a new lease of life. And I wish the team nothing but the best in getting that car some success. However, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and of course a massive thank you to the National Motorsport Academy for inviting me not just to the team's garage at Silverstone, but also to the team's headquarters in Nottingham. It was a simply unbelievable experience, and one I'll never forget. I'll put a link to the team's website in the description if you want to check them out. They have some cracking stuff as well. They offer the world's first online motorsport engineering degrees, and it can be all done from home as well. So if you're like me and thrive in a working environment in your own house, then you have the flexibility of being able to study whenever you want. All of which are built around courses specifically centred around motorsport. Areas such as motorsport engineering, team management, and commerciality in motorsport. If you have even a vague interest in any of those things, check the links in the description. Plus, you get to be part of a team which owns one of the rarest GTE cars ever created, so what's not to like? If you did enjoy this video, then I would enormously appreciate it if you did hit the like and subscribe button. But until the next video, be kind to each other and enjoy the rest of your day.